You Can Never Trust an Alsatian, from Where Dreams Have Gone, published by Simon and Pierre. Robin lay on her bed and stared at the tributary of tiny cracks in the ceiling plaster. At night they became places and faces. Tonight they were what they were. Her anger reduced them to mere grotty signs of wear and tear. She'd been banished to a room because she'd chanted, "Trish loves Dougie Foster," just as Dougie was walking his big Alsatian past their house. Trish had been on the front steps with her looking to see if the postman had brought any mail, and it had been done to annoy her more than anything else. She hadn't intended for him to hear. The trouble was, nobody in the house had any sense of humour. The very idea of Trish loving Dougie Foster was absurd. He was a tax accountant who lived 4 houses down, and who wore suits even to walk his dog. She'd never seen Dougie rumpled or untidy looking. In her imagination she even saw him going to bed in his eternal navy blue suit. He was the kind of dink to wear rubber gloves to pee. Robin detested Dougie Foster. He wasn't detested by everyone. Robin's mother was always going on about what a good cat she'd be, at the same time giving meaningful glances to Trish. Trish was 20 and expected to be on the lookout for a man. Men to Trish's mother were a breed of fish that could be reeled in on a line. Well, if he was a catch in Robin's mind, he was a bottom feeder. He was rich, that much she knew. What she also knew was that Dougie fancied Trish. Then everybody liked Trish, and she in her turn never slighted any man who was smitten with her. If there was anything her parents considered questionable about Dougie, it was his dog. Her father hated Rinty with a vengeance, because Rinty ran after his car in the street barking like crazy. He said more than once the dog should be muzzled. Her mother said Alsatians were notoriously unpredictable. Dougie walked him twice a day, regular as clockwork, and always past their house, never in the other direction. Dougie himself wasn't bad looking, except for his nostrils, which flared so you could see the inside of his nose and all the nose hair. It was somehow an indecent sight. He was also far too smug and self-assured. To Robin's mind, he seemed just like an old man. He'd lived with his mother for as long as Robin could remember, and he was part of the street, as familiar a sight as Mrs. Foster, his mother, a wee pixie of a woman with a collection of hats that put the Queen Mother's assortment to shame. Mrs. Foster didn't wear the hats wore Mrs. Foster. "For God's sake, would you look at the chamber pot she has on today?" Robin's mother would marvel from the window. "Gallagher the butcher'll wet himself when he sees that one." She might make fun of the hats, but Robin sensed her mother envied their flamboyance. Against her own serviceable and modest velours, Mrs. Foster's were garden party grand, and hinted of other visits besides trips to the butcher. Shortly after the episode on the front steps and Robin's banishment to her bedroom without her dinner, Dougie started dropping by to call on Trish. Rinty was tied up at the front gate and lay malevolent and nervous across the path, waiting for his master to come out. He barked at everything that moved. Her mother hid behind the curtains and waited for Dougie to take him away. She wouldn't have ventured out to save her life. "I've heard about those Alsatians," she said to Dougie. "They're police dogs trained to attack people." "Ah, isn't he a wee lamb?" Dougie tried to reassure her over the sound of Rinty's hysterical barks. Dougie's visits were awful. He fawned all over her mother as though she was the one he was interested in, and her mother lapped it all up. Trish was guardedly coy. What if Trish actually liked him? The thought made her want to vomit. All she could think about were those nostrils up close. She half hoped her father would have something negative to say on the subject of Dougie, but he never said a word. Dougie was full of talk about his business, and her father seemed happy to talk over his tax problems with someone. Conversations were dead boring, with Dougie bragging on and on about the money he could save people. Even Trish's eyelids began to close. When he saw that, he switched to talk of Rinty, his one other real interest in life. And then they were entertained with equally dull tales of Rinty's escapades. Things began to take a serious turn when he started to drop by on Sunday afternoons looking for Trish to go for a walk with him up the Lagan. Formerly Trish and Robin did the walk together. Now Robin was no longer welcome. Dougie's attraction grew and he bought a spiffy-looking dark blue Jaguar. He invited the whole family out for a spin. Sulkily, Robin refused the offer. Her mother was totally captivated and Trish was thrilled to be driven around town in the Jag. Robin felt a kind of desperation when Trish kept going on about him. Dougie says this and Dougie says that. She couldn't visualise her darling Trish married to this robot and having to visit them both and listen to Dougie and his deadly lectures. Robin was bound and determined that she would never marry. Long ago, to be precise, the day that she and her best friend Jill had found out how babies were really born, they'd both decide to be spinsters. They'd buy a house together and live on a diet of Mars bars, swearing that vegetables would never cross the doorstep of the house. Now, at a mature 12 years of age, especially since the new boy had moved into number 94, she was less sure about her vow. Meanwhile, there was the problem of Trish and Dougie. Then came the dreadful day when Trish came home with an enormous engagement ring on her finger. The diamond was so big she could hardly get her gloves on. Even Robin was silenced by its magnificence. The house was suddenly filled with people come to look. Trish became oddly silent when people said nice things about Dougie and asked where they were going to live. "Where are you going to live, dear?" her mother asked when everyone had gone home. "We can't exactly leave, Mrs. Foster. Dougie says she has to be with us. He says there's nothing wrong with their house." Trish's pretty mouth was now downturned and her eyes avoided Robin's. "You'll have to buy hats like his mother's," Robin said, lifting an apple off the table and taking a huge bite. "Oh, don't be such an idiot!" Trish flounced out of the room, ran up the stairs and slammed the bedroom door. "Sometimes you're too much," her mother said, turning on Robin. Robin studied the bite marks on her apple. "I suppose you'll make me go with the first person who comes along. Sell me to the first bidder." "If you don't go and do your homework now, you're up for sale." When Robin went to the bedroom she shared with Trish, Trish was lying on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Robin jumped on the other bed and took up the same pose. She was still eating her apple noisily. "It is a nice ring," she said finally. Trish didn't reply, and Robin turned to look at her. There were tears streaking down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do," Robin accused. "It was all your fault anyway," Trish said. "Well, how is it my fault?" "You and your Trish loves Dougie Foster. How do you think he got the idea?" The reality of what Trish was saying suddenly struck home. Was she about to be responsible for her sister making the worst mistake of her life? "Well, just tell him you don't want to marry him." "I can't do that," she wailed. "Everyone's seen the ring." "So what?" "Oh, God, you're impossible. You understand nothing." Trish leapt off the bed and slammed out of the bedroom. Robin felt odd, sort of queasy. Was it even dimly possible she might be responsible for the whole mess? She sat up and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Well, if so, then it was up to her to do something about it. She had no idea what, but she knew she had to think of something. The following week, nothing changed. Trish seemed resigned to her fate. She started to complain about Dougie's obsession with the dog. Whenever they planned to do something together, it seemed the dog always came first. The dog had to be walked or taken to the vet. She usually went with him when he walked the dog and stood for ages in the park at the top of the street. Dougie would spend eons of time exercising Rinty, while Trish waited patiently for it to be over. Robin always saw them there when she walked through the park to the street behind where her friend Jill lived. One night, when she was coming back from Jill's place, Doogie was there alone, throwing the stick back and forward for the dog. He threw the stick vaguely in Robin's direction, and as a joke she picked it up. She began barking and ran back to Doogie. The dog chased after her, snapping at her heels. In her effort to avoid the dog's anger, she ran full tilt into Doogie. "Oh, careful, little sister." He put his arms around her to steady her and kept a friendly arm around her shoulders. She looked down at the dog with terror and up into Doogie's pink nostrils. God, she was trapped between two nightmares. "Go on, give it to him. He won't hurt you." She released the stick and the dog took it in his jaws and bounded off. "There." Doogie patted her on the bum, keeping his hand there for just an instant longer than she thought was necessary. "You want to stay and play with the dog?" "Not on your life." She knew her response was too fast and also quite rude, but it came out before she could stop herself. He shrugged. Suit yourself." When she got home, her mother and Trish were sitting hunched over the coffee table. Her mother had a large sheet of paper in front of her, and Trish was leafing through a notebook. It appeared they were making up a guest list for the wedding. Robin's father sat buried behind his newspaper. Robin slumped on the sofa and watched the two of them engrossed in their list. "Are you really going to marry that pervert?" Robin said suddenly. Trish and her mother looked up as though electrified. Her father dropped the newspaper and took his spectacles off his nose. Robin had no idea why the words had come out, but now that they had, the die was cast. "What are you talking about?" Trish demanded. Her father put up a silencing hand. Robin shrugged. "Well, are you?" "What are you saying?" her father asked solemnly. Her mother stood up. A slight tremor had come into her hand. The paper she was holding shook a little as though ruffled by a breeze. Robin bit her lip. She knew she'd gone too far, but there was no going back. "I just think he's not very nice, that's all." Trish stood up. "Well, that isn't what you said. You called him a pervert. You just don't go around calling people perverts." "Trish, why don't you go to your room and your mother and I will handle things," her father said. "What things? I'm not a baby. Let her say what she has to say." All eyes turned to Robin again. "Well, we're waiting," Trish said. Robin closed her eyes with the faint hope that when she opened them again they would all have gone and everything would be wiped out. She opened them, but even squinting didn't alter the collage. Her father had a sternest expression in place. "He put a hand on my bottom," she said, looking from one face to the other, and allowing what she'd said to properly sink in. "That damn bastard!" Her father scrunched up the newspaper and threw it on his chair. Her mother let out a painful moan, and Trish did nothing, just stared at her in disbelief. "I'll kill him!" Her father moved to the door. "She's a little liar. She's jealous," Trish spat out. Her father paused at the door. "Jealous of Doogie Foster? I'd rather marry his mother." Robin crossed her arms and looked defiant. "George, come back," her mother directed to her father. "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "Kill him," her father said. Trish flopped into a chair. "Brilliant," she said with disdain. "The world's greatest little liar will have her father's death on her conscience when he gets the electric chair for killing Doogie Foster." "They hardly ever give the death penalty anymore," Robin said complacently. "You realise the seriousness of what you've just said?" Her father looked fit to explode. "Well, I guess he was just trying to be friendly," Robin shrugged. "But he did pat my bottom." "So now he patted your bottom? For Pete's sake, Robin!" Trish threw her hands up in the air. "You just about accused him of child molestation. Sometimes you're a real maniac. He's never even laid a hand on me, and she accuses him of this." Everyone stared at Trish in amazement. "What do you mean? He's never laid a hand on you?" Her mother rounded on Trish. Trish's face went scarlet. Well, he respects me. Her father stood transfixed, his eyes bulging. You've gone out with him for 6 months and he's never touched you? Well, he put his arm around me, that kind of thing. Her mother and father exchanged a look of deep concern. Well, I don't understand you. What do you want me to say? He raped me or something? Is that what you want? No attempt was made to go back to the wedding list. Everyone sat in silence for the longest time. At one point her mother and father went into the dining room and shut the door. Trish smiled suddenly at Robin. You really are dastardly. How did I ever get a sister like you? When their parents came back, Robin was banished to her room. She was glad to be out of the mess. Up in the bedroom, she went through the drawer where Trish kept her jumpers, pulling her own off over her head, and began to try them on, posing in front of the mirror and imagining what she'd look like if she'd some real chest to fill them out. It was a nuisance having a sister so much older. Often she'd wanted to ask her parents why there'd been no children in between, but it was always hard to get around to the topic. The following morning at breakfast nothing was said, but Trish sat there and the ring had disappeared from her finger. Robin had no idea at what time Trish had come to bed, but obviously the family conference had somehow dealt with the problem of the engagement. Doogie didn't come past their house any more when he walked the dog. Robin could only assume he went the other way, the long way around to the park. When he saw her in the street, he nodded curtly, but there was nothing to indicate that her father or mother had told him of her accusations. 6 months later, her father ran over Rinty in his car and killed him right in front of their house. The way he told it, the dog just ran out. Nobody saw the accident, but many of the neighbours came pouring onto the street. Doogie came running and went almost mad with grief. He yelled and screamed and even cried. At one point he accused her father of killing Rinty deliberately. The damn dog was always running out at me. You should have kept him tied up. It's not my fault if he runs under the wheels of the car. You hated him, Doogie yelled. They all stood mesmerised watching Doogie's performance. Her father didn't say another word. Trish kept well back, standing right by the side of the front door out of Doogie's sight line. In bed that night, Robin finally asked, What happened when you gave the ring back? Nothing. Trish rolled over on the side facing Robin. He just took it. You mean he didn't yell and scream and carry on like he did tonight? No. I guess he really did like that dog best.